been using my Substack a lot recently, and my Substack post yesterday was William James on drunkenness as a mystical experience.
Really?
Check
that's
that
that's one of the substances I tend to think the least of as a mystical experience. Because for me, it's like even as you're getting more drunk, you get less and less tuned into life in some way. Well, how does William James like?
I think he says there's hints of some greater purpose in drinking and alcohol. There's hints of something more. There's hints of a kind of wildness and cutting through ordinary consciousness. And then he says, isn't it tragic that for many people this is their only access to mystical reality is getting drunk? But he thought there's something there.
There is something, I think. Like when we did that podcast social, Lukas, you remember we went to go have a little boogie afterwards, and I was jumping up and down on Lukas's shoulders like, I'm so happy right now, you know.
It did happen.
I like it just stops me thinking, actually, because I find it really hard to stop my mind thinking. I never liked marijuana. You know, it gets me thinking, and I can't, you know, I don't find it, but having a beer just stops my mind. And
But anyway, Philip, we're really excited to chat to you today, so thanks for coming on Critical Edge.
Thanks for coming to my office. It's great to chat to you. I enjoyed the last conversation a good few years ago now.
Yeah, it's great. It was a while ago now. We were the Loaf Podcast back then, so a lot less, I think, of a cool name. But we used to say we like to break bread with the people on our podcast. That was our sort of slogan before. So
I see.
We can look at doing that today. We're trying to stay a little bit more open and conscious, of course. So yeah, I guess we want to start really at the most fundamental thing, I think, which when I started reading your work really opened me up to the hard problem of consciousness. So I think what people really misunderstand consciousness in public discourse, just because we view it from such a scientific perspective. David Chalmers, I think, kind of opened up what you would say is now kind of the standard way of viewing consciousness in analytical philosophy, I guess, which is that there's something that it's like to be that thing. That sounds really, really simple. What's the insight there that we can't get when people usually talk about consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually that phrase goes back to Thomas Nagel in his great article from the 1970s, What It's Like to Be a Bat. Actually, also, I always feel it's not very fair that the person who used it originally was Timothy Sprigg, who was perhaps like the only panpsychist philosopher.
Really?
In the mid to late 20th century in Edinburgh. I was too young to meet him, but I went to an event just after he died. Anyway, Timothy Sprigg. But he used it in those terms, but it's generally associated with Thomas Nagel. So I suppose the point is your consciousness is just what it's like to be you, right? You know, right now you're having a visual experience of the room around you, auditory experience of sound of my voice right now. If you pay attention, the sort of tactile sensation of the chair beneath your body. Maybe you're feeling excited, maybe you're feeling
very
tired.
excited, happy.
Maybe you're feeling bored. But whatever, this is all part of what it's like to be you right now. And that's all we mean by consciousness. I think sometimes when people hear the word consciousness, they think it's like something very sophisticated, like awareness of your own existence. But it just means experience of whatever form, feeling pain, seeing red. In a human being, it exists in a very complicated form, but I think in simpler forms of life, it exists in a much simpler form. So it's quite a flexible general notion, I think. Yeah.
I think, well, I mean, we're all conscious right now of this conversation, but
So far as you know.
well, I think it's a good way of putting it, what it's like to be something, because that's precisely it, consciousness. We've had podcasts before we start talking about consciousness, and I can already feel like, to some extent, maybe like a listener or a watcher, maybe their eyes start glazing over once it gets too technical. I think we can really like break it down to the simple idea, and I think what it's like to be something is such a key insight. What it's like to be me. Okay, so that's what consciousness is. What it's like to be a dog. And then I start thinking, what is it like to be a dog? And then I think, what it's like to be that chair. And then suddenly you realize, okay, so that chair is not conscious because I can't make that simple leap.
Doesn't have a point of view.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you see that?
Yeah, so consciousness is let me say that again. So consciousness is inherently subjective. To understand something's consciousness, you have to be able to adopt its perspective, look out of its eyes, hear out of its ears. This is what Nagel was getting at when he talked about what it's like to be a bat. And his point was, no matter what we know, no matter what we learn about the neurophysiological nature of the bat, we'll never know what it's like to kind of echolocate your way around the world, to sort of squeal and hear the echoes and kind of find your way around. We don't know what that's like. We can't adopt that perspective. And this leads us into one reason consciousness is such a unique problem. Because for the last 400 years, science has aimed at a completely objective description of reality. Actually, another phrase from Nagel here, the view from nowhere, right? That's what science aspires to, a sort of description of reality that could be understood by anybody, no matter what your life experience. So if aliens arrived with very different sense organs, they might not understand our art or our music, but if they were intelligent enough to know mathematics, they'd understand our physics. Yeah. So science aims at this completely objective description, but that's always going to miss out consciousness, because consciousness is inherently subjective. You can only understand it by adopting the perspective of the bat or the person or whoever it is you're thinking of.
Yeah. So you're a panpsychist, which for our listeners is the belief that everything is conscious. Now, to many people, like maybe when you're on the Joe Rogan podcast, that can sound quite woo-woo and people can misunderstand that quite a lot. So we'll get to that in a second. But the big click for me when I was becoming convinced of panpsychism was just realizing how inaccessible consciousness is from the point of view of science. So in your book, Why, which has just come out in paperback, you say something along the lines of, the language of science can never fully articulate the redness of a red experience. So even if we can, like, your bottle over there is red. So even if we can, calculate exactly what's going on in the brain when we're seeing red, you wouldn't be able to find red in there. And what that means is if somebody was colorblind, for example, even if you described everything about red to them, you would never actually be able to get that redness across to them. There's something that's completely inaccessible from the outside. And there's sort of a category difference.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. You mentioned David Chalmers a while ago, and actually it was his 60th birthday yesterday.
How was it? I tell him we say happy birthday.
I posted up some photos of me and Dave over the decades in playing Jenga in Shanghai.
That's a really unique experience.
Eating ice in the Arctic.
Okay, have you guys travelled the world together or what?
At the Beatles Museum in Liverpool.
It's quite romantic.
And in a samba club in Rio.
Okay. Samba club. You guys have really done everything.
Over 30 years or something. I am from Liverpool. Yeah. I'm not really a football guy. People always ask you about football when you're from Liverpool. I like the Beatles.
I love the Beatles.
There you go. But, so Chalmers, as you said, had this famous phrase, the hard problem. I don't use it anymore because...
Oh, that's interesting.
I think people... This is not what he actually says if you look at the details. But how people hear that is they just think, oh, it's just another scientific problem. How do brains make consciousness? Let's do more brain scans and that'll be it. That's how people hear it. But you're not even at first base with consciousness until you appreciate what a unique phenomenon it is. For exactly the reasons you're getting at there. I mean, here's another thing that annoys me. A lot of the public discussion of consciousness, people say it's a mystery.
Okay.
Nobody knows what consciousness is.
Yeah.
I think that's BS, right? I think we do know what consciousness is because
feel it every day, right?
Consciousness is just like feeling pain, and you know what pain is when you feel it. It's defined by how it feels, and you know what it is when you feel it. Moreover, the stuff we know about consciousness from the inside by being conscious that you can't get from experimental science, which is exactly, so I've circled back to your point. So like if you had a blind from birth neuroscientist, no matter how much they learn about the objective physical processes in the brain associated with color experience, they'll never know what it's like to see red, right? They'll never be able to adopt the perspective of someone who can see red, that qualitative character of a red experience. So, and this makes it completely different to any other scientific phenomenon. I don't know, like lightning, right? If you take lightning, you know what the hell it is till you do the science. What is it? It's like the anger of the gods or something. You do the science, you find out it's electric discharge. Or water. The ancient Greeks used to think it was a fundamental element with earth, air, and fire. You do the science, you find out, it's H2O. But with consciousness, we already know what it is. That the challenge is, how does what we know from the inside fit together with what we know from the outside about the brain?
Yeah.
So you've just got to get to that starting point before you can even... And I don't think we're there as a society.
That's the click that I think a lot of people miss. And that's the click for me, which actually makes... I know you don't like using the terminology, so I'm apologizing in advance, but I think that's what makes the hard problem of consciousness a hard problem. So let's imagine that Lukas and I, just for the sake of argument, are two very unintelligent blokes, you know. How would you explain the hard problem of consciousness to us if we didn't know anything about it?
Yeah, so as I say, I wouldn't put it in terms of a hard problem. I think that kind of gives people the wrong idea. I think we should think of the problem as about bringing together or marrying two ways of knowing about reality. Right? We know all about this consciousness stuff from the inside by being conscious. We know all about the reality of feelings and experiences, at least our own feelings and experiences. And we also know a lot about the brain and the physical world more generally from science. We know about reality from the outside. And then the challenge is, how do we bring these two ways of knowing together in a single unified theory of reality? So it's at least not a straightforward scientific problem. Science is relevant, but it's not just the normal scientific issue of, oh, we need this experimental data. It's a very unique challenge, and you essentially need scientists and philosophers working together to make progress on this. And I think this is why we're not making as much progress as we could be, because we still haven't quite got to that point.
Yeah, I mean, like, for me, even when you explain it, let's say, in very like layman's terms, like Ollie said, we're maybe not unintelligent, or not even unintelligent, we don't know kind of even like the terminology of philosophy. So me and Ollie have been trying to debate this, and we're struggling. This was yesterday in the car on the way here. We're struggling to even, I don't know, visualize these concepts like consciousness. We're not trying to visualize consciousness. I think of maybe brain signals.
Yeah.
But then I'm kind of like, well, what is it? Is it like this thing living in my head? Is it based in material world? Is it kind of just emerging from these neurons firing? How would you like go about describing consciousness, apart from maybe just what maybe someone might argue is circular? Oh, consciousness is what we feel or what we experience. Is there any other way of describing it?
I mean, it's the problem, isn't it? It's sort of a primitive. It's just...
You just get it.
Well, it's like...
it is what it is.
Louis Armstrong famously said about jazz, you know, if you have to... What is jazz? He said, if you have to ask, you'll never know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pain, it's excitement, it's seeing colour. That's what it is. But then there's this other thing. Patterns of neural firings. Chemical signals. Various activity in the brain. Now, we know that they go together, right? I mean, this is the trouble I had with Joe Rogan. He kept saying, well, we know that brain activity goes with consciousness. Yeah. Of course. That's not... I mean, you don't even have to do science, right? If I hit you over the head, you will lose your consciousness.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a close connection. There's a correlation. Certain kinds of brain activity go along with certain kinds of experience. And that is a scientific task to work out which, and to hopefully work out what in general is the kind of brain activity which gives you... Let me say that again. Or work out in general what kind of brain activity is necessary and sufficient for consciousness. That's the scientific task. But that's not the only thing we need to explain. We also need to explain why. Why does patterns of neural firings give you a feeling? Give you this inner world of colors and sounds and smells and tastes? That's where it gets into the philosophical question. Why should brain activity? Why aren't we just complicated, unfeeling mechanisms? Because if you just look at the brain science, and we know a hell of a lot about the brain now, still a lot we don't know, but we know a hell of a lot. If you just look at that story of patterns of neural firings and information being sent, there could be no feelings there. It could be we could just be complicated mechanisms. But we know, because we're conscious, that that produces consciousness, that produces feelings. Why do these two things go together? That's the philosophical question.
I think the philosophical zombie thought experiment is a great way to access this kind of thing. So the idea basically is to think of somebody who might be like me, but completely not conscious. So on the basic materialist view of the universe, I guess, we have just inert matter interacting in certain ways, and throughout evolution that gets more and more complex, and at a certain point consciousness pops up out of nowhere. And that seems really hard to explain on the materialist view, because just on the basis of the conservation of energy and the way that the brain works and so on and so forth, we could have all of those signals just working without any consciousness attached. So the philosophical zombie problem seeks to ask, basically a philosophical zombie is somebody who's exactly like me, but who doesn't have consciousness attached. So I would be here and I would be responding to you and hopefully being charismatic, maybe making a joke or two here, but there would actually be nothing going on the inside. That seems like something that science can't explain, why there aren't philosophical zombies or why there can't be philosophical zombies. So I think panpsychism does a really good job of explaining why we can't have philosophical zombies, because the brain activity is so deeply, deeply connected to the consciousness that arises. So I guess we should start very at the basic building blocks of panpsychism. How would you explain it to somebody who hadn't studied philosophy before?
You can maybe see panpsychism as continuing a trend that's been going on for some time now. If we go back to the start of the scientific revolution, it was thought that we were the only conscious ones, right? And animals were just unfeeling mechanisms.
Okay.
That was Descartes' view. He used to cut up live animals, right? Because he thought they're just mechanisms.
They were just machines, 'cause they didn't have the soul.
They seem to be screaming, but that's just a mechanical
It's
reaction.
kind of like you poke it and it screams in the same way, you press power on the computer and it turns on. That was his view, right?
Exactly. It's difficult to sort of imagine hearing the screams of a dog and not thinking that's an expression of...
Yeah, weird.
But yeah, maybe that's I guess the philosophy infects how you see the world. But anyway, that was the view then. And then very slowly, we've ascribed consciousness to more and more of the natural world, starting with higher primates, other mammals. Only very recently, fish and birds. And then a couple of years ago, there was what's called the New York Declaration, where a couple of hundred scientists said they're now taking seriously insect and reptile consciousness. We're learning more and more.
How do they go about that? Just if it's not about the brain, then how do they kind of make that assumption or that judgment?
Any of this is very difficult, and there is no consensus. I mean, this declaration didn't say insects are conscious. It says there's reason to take it seriously.
Okay.
Yeah.
But how do you do it? Because consciousness is not publicly observable. I mean, essentially... What you do is you start with the human case. You can't see someone's consciousness, but you can ask them, what are you feeling when we stimulate your brain like this?
Or like you said, you could smack Lukas on the head and he would scream.
That's
and you'd
at
be
least...
like, well, he's probably actually in pain,
One conclusion, see what's going on. And then you try and extrapolate from there.
Yeah.
But, I'm enthusiastic about that task. But at the moment, there is no consensus. There are different camps, and there is no agreement. And there's a lot of papers coming out recently just pointing to how these different camps seem to have kind of embedded assumptions. They're not just looking at the data, and they've got embedded assumptions that are moving them in different directions. And it's very hard to see how we're going to make progress. But anyway, there is that move, at least, to ascribe consciousness to more and more things.
Sure.
The panpsychist just takes that to its end point and says, not only are the simplest forms of life, cellular life, have consciousness, but the molecules, the atoms, the subatomic particles have ludicrously simple forms of conscious experience. And that the complex experience of the human or animal brain is built up from very simple forms of consciousness at the fundamental level. So we are conscious creatures in a conscious universe. That's the basic idea. But
I think that's so good because, look, I'm not fully convinced by this viewpoint of panpsychism.
We're getting there.
We're getting
I'm
there.
doing
So
my best.
So Ollie's been trying to convince me for the past, since we last interviewed you, basically. And I'm getting more and more convinced by it. I guess partly the reason I'm not completely convinced is I've grown up my whole life seeing the world from quite a scientific, rigid view. And I kind of think, well, that's the way it is. But the more I think about this, the question at hand, the more convinced I am. I mean, for me, the real question is, how, and Ollie alluded to this earlier, how do you have a world, right, from the Big Bang, that's all just atoms and chemicals which are dead? We could call them dead for the sake of the conversation. That becomes the rocks, and that becomes the planet Earth, which is all we usually view as not being conscious. And then all of a sudden, a bacteria forms, life comes out of nothing. We say, oh, okay, so this is living, but it came from absolutely non-living matter. And then that became a human who can think and observe. And last night, Ollie and I were in the hotel room kind of like, oh, these walls are so... And we're kind of leaning into the fact that we were observing and looking and talking. And I slapped him on the leg and he kind of... you don't get that with things like books and a microphone. So for me, it's kind of like, okay, so maybe we're just more complex versions of matter that already is conscious. And once you build it up enough and it becomes complex enough, then we create something like a human. Or something like human consciousness.
Yeah.
It is convincing.
Yeah. Well, let me back that up by giving you, seeing as you're saying you're scientifically minded.
Yeah.
And I'm sure lots of the viewers or listeners will be too. Let me give you two examples from the history of science. Firstly, pretty soon after Darwin, many evolutionary theorists took to a certain kind of panpsychism. I mean, something Darwin, I had a PhD student recently who was inclined to think, Darwin himself was at least attracted to biopsychism, that all living things are conscious. William James saw a panpsychist direction in the evolutionary story because, as you say, it's like we've got this nice story thanks to Darwin of simple matter getting shaped by natural selection to more complex forms. And then what? Suddenly, at some point in that story, the lights turn and consciousness appears. Or, isn't it, it seems more elegant and unified to think, no, consciousness was always there in very simple forms, then natural selection molds it over millions of years to more complex forms. But another example, I mean, what I talk about a lot in my book, Galileo's Error, for example, I think it's very important to go back to the start of the scientific revolution. The intellectual, philosophical foundations were largely shaped by one person, Galileo, and Galileo kind of invented mathematical physics, right? This strange idea, very unusual at the time, that we can just frame mathematics. Sorry, say that again.
All good.
That we can just frame science and mathematics in the language of mathematics. That had never been done before. People like maths, but they didn't think we could completely describe the physical world. But Galileo thought, there's one thing that gets in the way. These qualities we encounter in our conscious experience, the colors, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, you can't capture those qualities in the purely quantitative language of mathematics. You know, you can't capture that deep red you experience when you watch a sunset in an equation, right?
Yeah.
So Galileo said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to divide up nature.
Yeah.
Right? Consciousness and its funny subjective qualities, they're in the soul. They're outside of science. All the colors, sounds, smells, tastes, they're in consciousness, in the soul. Once we've stripped that away, everything else can be captured in objective, quantitative mathematics. So that was the start of mathematical physics. That went really well. Right?
Okay.
The last 400 years got incredibly well. Now we're at a period of history where people think, physical science has gone so well. It's going to explain consciousness. Of course it is. You know, look how well it's going. Well, hold on. It's gone so well since, and arguably because Galileo took consciousness out of the story. So I think what we need to do now, if we want to bring consciousness back into science, we need to find a way of bringing back together what Galileo separated, the objective and the subjective, the qualitative and the quantitative. And I think panpsychism gives us a nice, elegant way of doing that.
And it's quite countercultural now, I think, in the sense that this sort of scientific viewpoint is so deeply encoded in the way we think about the world that panpsychism, for me, I mean, I studied philosophy at university, and yet often when I talk to friends or whoever it is about philosophy, often they can kind of switch off once it gets quite technical. But panpsychism is one of those ideas that really makes me feel like a rock star philosopher, you know, like maybe Mark Knopfler or something like that, you know, like I'm sitting there like, cool, like everything's conscious, man, you know. And the reason I love it is there's so much resistance at the beginning. So even when Lukas and I first started talking about panpsychism, and I'd already sort of heard about it, I think from watching Alex O'Connor's podcast for the first time, is that at the beginning, there was so much resistance from you just straight away, like, come on, everything's conscious. Like when you say it to people, like if you say it in a pub, for example, people kind of do a double take and think like, okay, what's going on with this guy, you know? And more, I think people are becoming open to that idea, and it's becoming less and less countercultural. Do you think we're on a trend to getting away from that resistance and sort of being more open to consciousness? Because I think a lot of people are like, I think a lot of people are still like, neuroscience is going to do it, man.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
would you feel like a rock star when you're talking about panpsychism?
Yeah, man. I'm aiming to play Wembley with this stuff. And
yeah.
They haven't invited me yet, but
You'll get there.
if you take a slightly broader historical perspective, actually the trajectory has changed pretty quickly. You know, for most of the 20th century or the post-war 20th century, you couldn't talk about consciousness. It was a taboo, you know, it was not seen as proper science. It's only since the 1990s, thanks to people like David Chalmers, Christoph Koch, this is now seen as a serious scientific task. I think the problem is, though, people are still just thinking of it as it's just a normal scientific problem. They're not appreciating how unique this is. They're not appreciating the philosophical underpinnings. They're not appreciating that the entire scientific enterprise of the last 400 years was set up on taking consciousness out of science. So I think it's just about, and you know, I think progress has stalled because of that. But you know, look, I think we're not going to make progress until we properly understand what's going on here. And the great thing about consciousness is it's so hard to deny it exists. You know, other things philosophers worry about, like maybe free will or moral value, good and bad, right or wrong. You know, how do these fit into our scientific story? There's always an option to say, maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe we're not really free in the way we think we are. Maybe good and bad and right and wrong are just our feelings projected onto the world. I don't buy either of those, but
you can see where they're coming from.
It's an intellectually plausible option. But to say like no one's ever felt pain, no one's ever seen red. I mean, some people are tempted to this.
I mean, you're discounting a big intuition there, right?
Yeah. So I think it's changing quickly. I think it's a matter of time. And I mean, part of this is just getting people to see what the importance of philosophy. That I think because science has gone so well and it's wonderful and it's incredible technology, and we're in a phase of history where people think that's it. You do the experiment, you get the results. It's not always so simple. I think with consciousness, with quantum mechanics, these areas where the rules of the game are not quite fixed. You need judgment calls on how we're interpreting the data, how we're understanding the explanatory framework. You need philosophers. You need scientists and philosophers. But we're not going to make progress until we get that as a society, until we see the need for philosophy on consciousness or quantum mechanics. I think we'll get there.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic. My wife says I'm an optimist. And
I think it's good to be an optimist.
It's
That's
exciting to be part of that process, you know? Alex O'Connor's credited me very kindly with persuading him of the truth of panpsychism. Philip Pullman, the novelist, credited me with his latest novel of...
He had a quote on the back of your book. That was cool. I liked seeing that.
Very panpsychist theme.
Yeah, we've been trying to get him on, actually. I think he'd be cool to talk to.
Yeah, having conversation with spiritual leaders, booked in for my third discussion with former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams. So yeah, there's a big, exciting conversation, and it has been challenging at times with certain members of the profession getting very annoyed that this view is getting taken seriously. I suppose when in their philosophical education, it was sort of ridiculous, and that's what they've learned, and then suddenly it's getting taken more seriously. So it has been challenging, but it's been wonderful to be part of this.
Feels like more people are talking about
change.
it. Yeah.
Here's another way of thinking about it. I've got to say, my new book I've just finished called Heresy.
Link down below.
Well, it won't be out for another year. But I think maybe the cultural revolution of the 60s, maybe...
I was literally about to talk about the 60s, I swear.
Maybe part of the reason it didn't sustain is maybe there wasn't the intellectual foundations.
Yeah.
I think maybe now with panpsychism there is. So maybe we can get back to... Maybe panpsychism makes hippie shit scientifically credible.
Yeah. And that is why it's rockstar philosophy. But
that's it.
I was going to say, if I look, and this is really pop history, but when I look back at like the history of the 20th century, who was open to consciousness? It was the hippies of the 60s and 70s who thought in these sort of what people often think are like these quite woo-woo ways. And what was one of the central things that hippies did? Well, LSD. They went to protest, but they also took psychedelics. And that was, I think, a large part of this sort of countercultural being open to consciousness and stuff. So to talk about psychedelics, why do you think they are something which make us open to consciousness as a real fact, or really open us up to the deep element of that? What's going on there?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of what's going on.
We don't want to say it's everything, but
that people are taking psychedelics more seriously, scientifically, and there's a greater openness to exploring them scientifically. I would like to push, that there are dangers with psychedelics. There are real
100%.
dangers. They're not generally thought to be physically harmful or addictive. And so that's why it's wild. It's ridiculous that they're classed as Class A drugs, the same as heroin and cocaine, which are physically harmful.
Good.
But they can be psychologically dangerous. They tear apart our ordinary ways of thinking. And those ordinary ways of thinking are often important for sort of psychological stability. So, I think a sensible law would be not to just make them freely available, but to decriminalize them, make them available in very controlled circumstances with a professional therapist or guide, because there's increasing evidence that they do have, as well as the sort of insights and spiritual benefits, that they have mental health benefits, very real mental health benefits. So I guess in the current situation, I wouldn't particularly want to encourage people to take psychedelics, actually, but it would be good to have a situation where they are available in a decriminalized, highly controlled form, maybe treated a bit like dangerous sport, we let people do kind of crazy sports, as long as you do it in a controlled way and you're as safe as you can be. And, but
like skydiving with a professional, if we just let people jump out of planes,
exactly,
that would be a bit mental, wouldn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Wear a parachute, wear a helmet, and then go from there.
I don't know if a helmet will save you, to be fair, but I see what you mean.
I think 2 days ago you sent us an email, which I think we need to talk about. It said, Lukas, Ollie, I've just done toad venom. We need
great opener.
We need to talk about that.
Philip. People might be thinking, I'm being very sensible here. I wouldn't recommend. They're very dangerous. And then actually, I just smoked some toad venom. So I was lucky enough to be able to do this in very controlled circumstances with a professional therapist. But even then, it was absolutely terrifying and absolutely life-changing. So toad venom, also known as 5-MeO DMT, different to standard DMT. It's unique because it's maybe I rambled a bit there.
No, we're good. Don't worry, we're having a chill conversation. So
well, maybe I could just describe how it seemed. Okay. And then we could maybe have a discussion about, was this a hallucination? But I can describe to you how it seemed. And
tell us a story.
It's a nice example because if you read what other people have written about this, Christoph Koch, the scientist, or Michael Pollan, it's pretty consistent with this experience. So here's what it seemed like. Philip Goff, was annihilated. Was violently wiped out of existence, which was absolutely terrifying.
My heart is beating a little bit faster.
I was instantly annihilated, and what remained was the indescribable roaring storm of consciousness that underlies all things.
So were you in your body? I mean, like, from step one, the process. So you smoke the toad venom, let's say. What slowly starts to happen to your mind?
It's not slow. So this is what
quickly starts.
What's so unique about this? It's one of the most powerful psychedelics we know of. But it's in a sense very pure because there's nothing psychological like you can have with LSD. You can go on all sorts of narrative trips, and with DMT you can meet creatures, and there's nothing visual. There's nothing psychological. It is pure, instant, almost violent ego dissolution. And it's also very brief. So, I mean, when you have the experience, it feels timeless. It feels like I use the word you there. It's hard to talk about this because I don't think I existed. But
wow.
There is no space, there is no time in this reality. There is just this indescribable non-dual consciousness.
So are you seeing the room around you? No. Okay.
Completely internal, completely. I mean, the full story actually. There were 3 strengths, and checking in every 10 minutes to see how you're up to. So I tried the 2 mildest ones, and felt absolutely nothing except my nerves went.
Mm-hmm.
Tried the next step up,
and then boom,
and then no, still nothing.
Oh,
I was like, what should I do? This is like 40 minutes in now, and I was like, I'm just lying there for 40 minutes with a blindfold. And I was thinking, I'll try another medium one. I'm alright. This is cool. I was feeling pretty chilled, and I'm ready for this. So I tried the strongest one. It's like fuck, instantly. So even though I was well prepared, people, advised you need to give yourself to this. You need to not resist it. I was very well prepared. Even then, it was terrifying because, I believe I was temporarily killed. I experienced death, and it was absolutely terrifying. And then after that one hit that worked, that's it. I can't do that again because anyone you can check out Joe Rogan talking about his experience on this. It is terrifying, and I've used that word a lot now, haven't I? So that's what I wanted. I wanted that experience. I've had it. That's me done now. But yeah, so it's...
And you're back. Good to see you back, Philip.
Thank you. Yeah. Where do you want to go with this?
Well, I mean, I guess I want to start talking about maybe the reliability of the experience, like what can actually be taken from it. Because I think the standard point of view on psychedelics is, even if it's cool and you can access insight, basically what's happening is something like hallucination.
Yeah.
So the same way that if I was having a psychotic episode right now and I thought, for example, Nathan wasn't over there handling the camera, but there was another Nathan handling the camera over there, right? And he wasn't there. I think people tend to think about psychedelics in that frame.
Yeah, because I'd argue that wouldn't be true in a sense, right? You'd be to some extent fooled. So
Yeah.
So
no, it's a good point. And so it's good to distinguish how things seem to whether, well, philosophers use this word veridical, from veritas, truth in Latin.
I love that word.
Are things as they seem in the experience. So there's how things seem, which we call the content of the experience, and then if it's veridical, things really were as they seemed, the opposite of a hallucination. I like to come back to probably still one of the best things on mystical experiences, William James's chapter on mystical experiences in his great book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. People should read James. If you haven't read James, he's, he feels like a contemporary thinker. This was like a 19th century guy. Anyway, so most of it is like a careful psychological study of mystical experiences. But at the end, James asks the question we're asking now. If you have one of these experiences, is it rational to trust it? To believe that things really are as they seem to be? And he gives an interesting answer. He says, well, if you say no, it maybe implies a certain double standard. Because we all think it's okay to trust ordinary experiences, sensory experience. There's a table in front. There isn't a table.
Maybe you shouldn't be trusting it so much.
I'm hallucinating.
Too much cold venom.
Oh God, it's all going wrong.
No.
You need to trust your senses to do science, right? Our senses could be. All of this could be hallucination. We could be in the Matrix. You can't get outside of your consciousness to check whether your experience is connecting you to a genuine reality. I mean, in a sense, you can test whether your senses are correct, but that's only by using your senses. So you go in a circle. All knowledge is rooted in trusting experience, right? So if it's okay to trust ordinary sensory experiences, even though they could be delusions, why is it not okay for a mystic to trust what their mystical experience seems to tell them? What's the relevant difference? And
would you not say that, like, maybe like, I'm just and I don't want to be a skeptic, but I feel like someone who says, I took a drug. Some people might say, well, that's the difference. You took a drug that's actually altering your brain, so that's why you can't trust it.
Yeah, I was arguing this with my wife Emma the other day. She was pressing this on me. She's very skeptical. She doesn't believe anything I say. Well, but there are different ways of interpreting what's going on in these experiences. Right. So one thing it could. So what is the drug doing? That's what we need to ask. Right. What is the drug doing? It could be creating a hallucination, or it could be inhibiting ordinary consciousness to open you to something that's already there at the base of your consciousness. And I mean, Christoph Koch, who's had the same toad venom experience I have, people can read. He wrote a book that partly talked about this. Oh, well, I interviewed him on my YouTube channel, Philip Goff Philosophy.
Shout it out. Guys, go subscribe.
Just my name with philosophy at the end.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Inspired.
Like
Inspired. Thank
Original.
you. We talked about his experience. So it looks like the neuroscience, there is not much brain activity going on,
okay.
right? So it does look more like, it's more like ordinary consciousness is being, what's the word? Inhibited, subdued,
all of the stuff on top,
rather than it's creating something. Now I'm not using this as a proof here, that so it must be. I'm just saying, responding to your objection.
Sure.
I mean, I believe it because I experienced it, and I don't see why I should be skeptical of that experience rather than this experience right now. But if you say to me, well, oh no, but surely there's a drug creating this, it does, neuroscientifically, it doesn't look like that.
Okay.
Look, and let me tell you how my experience seemed to fit with that, insofar as I can describe it at all. I mean, here's a very imperfect metaphor I came up with after this experience. So imagine my mind is a light bulb covered in cotton wool. And so the cotton wool is like what makes me me, what's particular to me and my ordinary consciousness. And then the light bulb is this sort of pure, raging form of consciousness that doesn't belong to anyone, that sort of underlies everything.
Whoa, okay.
That's sort of somehow at the base of my mind and your mind. And what happened, what the drug did, was just rip off the cotton wool. So like annihilate me, but to leave this pure consciousness, sometimes called non-dual consciousness, that was always there at the root of my consciousness.
Off comes the charisma, the intelligence, being a kind guy, and then all of a sudden you just got
failings too, the ADHD, the obsessiveness,
I got that as well,
the inability to relax, vanity, fame, obsession. Yeah. Anyway,
are you describing me and Lukas or yourself?
I'm sure we're all
we're all kind of like that.
We're
I suppose.
all messed up, aren't we? So that's what it felt like, So if you ask me, oh well, look, how can you believe this? It was a drug doing something to you. You've got to ask what the drug was doing, and what it seemed like was the drug was destroying most of my mind temporarily, but it still was bloody scary. But just revealing something that's always there at the base of things.
I think one of the big sort of reasons that people don't tend to trust mystical experience, as well as what Lukas explained in the particular case of psychedelics, like the fact you're taking a drug is maybe like, and I don't agree with this view, but the inconsistency of mystical experience. So somebody who's Christian maybe has a mystical experience and thinks they've seen Jesus or one of the saints, and somebody who's Hindu or Muslim or whatever other world religions thinks they've had a different one. But what I really like about William James, and I haven't read the book, I've just read you talking about him in your book, Why, is that the basic idea there, which is kind of what you're describing in the Toad Venom experience, is this connection to something more, is this feeling of oneness. And that's kind of maybe what the mystical experience is, with everything stripped away. So I'm actually quite inclined to believe as well that there's something you're connecting to. But did you feel that sort of connection to other things, or was it just sort of a raging consciousness? Was there the oneness element?
Just on your first point.
Go ahead.
That, I think we need to be careful. There's lots of different things called mystical experience. As you say, there's lots of different, in different religions and cultures. Actually, there's a great book. I was just at a conference with one of the authors, called The Varieties of Spiritual Experience, which is aimed at being a sort of contemporary analogue of James's book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. So it's a great categorization, looking at the science, different kinds of... But what is nice about the Toad Venom is it's so uniform for anybody who has it.
Yeah.
As far as I've seen, reading different people, it's so uniform. And as you say, this kind of sense of oneness does seem to crop up in in different religions, in different cultures. Probably the purest form is Advaita Vedanta, this form of Hindu mysticism. Where, I mean, it's the most radical form. They think all there really is this pure consciousness, right? Everything else is an illusion. There isn't you and me and this and that. There's just this pure, undifferentiated consciousness. I find that a bit hard to believe. I was wondering when I had the experience, would I think, oh no, that's really correct? But it's
a bit like Walt Whitman, everything is one.
So we find it in Hindu mysticism, but also in Christianity with the 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart, who got in trouble with the Pope for saying the ground of the soul is the ground of God, right? He thought the most foundational bit of us...
The light bulb.
The light bulb is the most foundational bit of God. Also, we have Sufis in Islam who have declared, I am the real, I am the truth, which is one of the names for God in the Quran. So what one such Sufi mystic got quite badly killed and burned for this crime. People think Meister Eckhart was influenced now by Marguerite Porete, who was a sort of independent spiritual woman at the time, who was burnt at the stake for thinking this. So anyway, this sense of oneness. Okay, but coming back to your question, did I have this? I thought the day after I had this experience, I thought I didn't have this cliched sense of being one with everything.
Okay.
But then I think it's because I was thinking of that as sort of your mind expands and fills the universe. But imagine your consciousness sort of filled the universe. You'd still be able to distinguish the different bits of your experience, right? Your experience of the planets and your experience of the sun. But with this experience, the reality is there is no I and other. There is no this and that. There is no differentiation. So like in your ordinary consciousness, there's like the left bit of my visual field and the right bit, and there's the colors and the sounds. This sense was that the idea of more than one thing made no sense. At this level of reality, the idea of multiplicity, the idea of plurality makes no sense.
Was there anything visual going on, or was it just blackness?
So in that sense, I think it was one with everything, because the idea of difference made no sense. So that's the sense in which I wasn't there. Was there? No, I don't think there's any. Was there blackness? I mean, blackness, that would, in a sense, be visual, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So some people talking about this have a sense of white light. I think I didn't even have that. I think I would just say it was completely indescribable.
Ineffable.
Ineffable. No sense of time and space, no colours, sounds. But no difference between I and other, this and that. So yeah. So if this experience was veridical, is veridical for any, it seems to be the same whoever has it. At this level of reality, everything is all one, in the sense that the idea of this and that makes no sense.
On the mystical point, I mean, Ollie, do you believe that these people who have, just because you brought it up, these people that, for example, see Mother Mary, do you think that's kind of like veritable? Do you think that's true?
Veridical,
Veridical, rather, sorry.
No, I think that's a good question. My perspective is probably that there's veridical and non-veridical elements of psychedelic experience. So the same way that, for example, when you look at a stick in water, it bends, and maybe the stick isn't actually bent. I think in psychedelic experience, there's deep truths, and maybe there's parts which aren't deeply true. So do I want to stake a position and say this religious experience is true and this religious experience is probably not? No, but I guess, like you, Philip, I'm probably decently confident that this feeling of oneness and connectedness, whatever it's pointing to, something is going on there. I mean, Lukas, you're more skeptical than I am. So what do you think? Like,
I don't buy. I don't buy it. I think if someone tells me that they've seen, I don't know, the Holy Spirit, my gut instinct is to say it feels like there's something going on. Maybe they are having a I don't know, some kind of psychosis, or I mean, when someone's possessed, right, and needs to be exorcised by a priest, my first gut instinct, right, is that there's something like schizophrenia going on, and I find it hard to believe that that's like truly a demon, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy, and I know that's not what you're claiming, but it's easy to see how how the line between those two isn't necessarily so clear.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd agree with you when it's something so culturally specific, like Mother Mary or a demon or something. Yeah, I would be skeptical too. But when there's something which is so uniform in different contexts, and also, look, I mean, what I talk about in my new book, it might depend on your background assumptions. Carl Sagan famously said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah.
But what is extraordinary depends on your background assumptions. So suppose you have a more conventional scientific viewpoint that consciousness is a local neurobiological phenomenon that emerged at a certain point later in evolution. And then you have this experience that there is this raging storm of consciousness underlying all things. You've got maybe a good reason to think that's a hallucination because it doesn't fit with what I take myself to know about the world. But now, take someone like me who's a panpsychist, who already thinks there's consciousness underlying all things. And then I have this experience that seems to open me up to this sort of non-dual form of consciousness. I mean, it fits with what I already believe, and it seems more real than any other experience I've ever had. Why aren't I going to believe it? I mean, everything's very uncertain. I don't,
Sure.
I'm skeptical about everything. But insofar as I take ordinary experience seriously, I don't see why I shouldn't take that experience seriously.
I liked I guess you could call it a metaphor, maybe a thought experiment in your book, Why, of the person at the bottom of a dark well. So the idea is there's somebody who shows up at the bottom of the dark well. Let's say it's Lukas, for example. And Lukas is at the bottom of this dark well. He can't see anything. He can't hear anything. He's got absolutely no information going on. And then somebody shouts down from the top and they're telling him basically...
Let's say it's Philip.
Yeah, let's say it's Philip. That is, fair enough. Maybe that's what's going on here. But anyway, and Philip...
Oh no,
Philip
I don't want to be a sort of...
No.
prophet or something.
No. But let's say Philip, you're talking to Lukas and saying, Lukas, mate, this is why you're here. This is how you got here. This is how you can get out. This is what you should believe about what's happening in the next life. Whatever. You wouldn't really have any reason, I guess, not to trust him. Or to put it this way, to put it in maybe the inverse, you can't really do anything but trust Philip.
Yeah.
Because you have nothing else going on. And this is really like what's happening in normal consciousness, right? So we have sense experience, and the only way we can validate sense experience is with sense experience. So let's say, for example, Philip, you tell Lukas, you can't see, but you're actually a really unattractive bloke. The only way Lukas can check, since he's in the dark, is to go, am I really unattractive, Philip? And Philip go, yeah, sorry, mate, I'm sorry, that's just the truth, right? So in the same way, you have regular experience, which is like that. Now, this sort of psychedelic experience, mystical experience, is also somebody shouting from the top of the dark well. So why, I guess, Lukas, my question is to you, is there that fundamental difference for you between the regular element of experience, the regular things that Philip is shouting at you from the top of the well, and the mystical things that he's telling you?
Yeah, and thing is, I don't know. And I think to some extent, it's probably not solvable. What I feel is that to some extent, it feels like I'm in default settings right now. And that feels to me the most trustworthy version. And then once you start bringing in things like alcohol, which is going to make me throw up and maybe makes me a bit woozy. Or once I take psychedelics, then it's the effect of the drug rather than necessarily revealing something about the world. But I also take your point that fundamentally there's not actually a difference between those two experiences. Like I said, my pushback is if someone sees Mother Mary, that cultural idea that then gets put onto it. In a similar way, you might say that your experience, right, of experiencing the world as this oneness, that's just your cultural imprint rather than necessarily this veridical experience.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, definitely agree with you in a sort of seeing it as Jesus or Mary or Muhammad or something. But yeah, that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting thought. Was I maybe just projecting onto this sense of oneness?
I mean, very much the same for everyone, though.
It seems very hard to make sense. I mean, there was in a way, there was kind of no conceptual thought. Well, I would say there's no conceptual thought during the experience. What I'm doing now is sort of thinking back, trying to... But it was so indescribable. It's not like there was something I was interpreting.
Did it feel religious a little bit or spiritual somehow while you were experiencing it?
Do you know what I thought after... I went to Catholic Mass Easter Sunday morning with my mother. I'm not Catholic, but I self-identify as a heretical Christian. Anyway, maybe that's another conversation next time. But I was raised Catholic. My mother's Catholic, so I went to Catholic Mass and saw the incense, and I was just my mind wandering slightly, and don't tell the priest. But I was just thinking, actually, this experience. Maybe the familiar psychedelic friendly crowd don't have the vocabulary for this toad venom one. I was reading, people should check it out, Michael Pollan, who's recently got a best-selling book on consciousness that came out. But in his book on psychedelics, he talks about his toad venom experience, and he sort of doesn't know what to do with it. It's like, where's the nice elves? It's just, it's unpleasant. I think we need maybe the Old Testament language of terror and awe of beholding the divine. It's like, oh my, that's what it felt like. It felt like fucking hell, unbearable, because it was so overwhelming and so wonderful, and in some sense wonderful. Like, so this is not the kind of drug you take at a party, It's just like, oh fucking hell, what is this indescribable raging storm? But yeah, I guess I did see it as religious, and the way I think about Christianity is very influenced by Eastern Christianity. I think actually the way they think about things made good sense of my experience, actually. So in Eastern Christianity, they distinguish two aspects of God: God's essence and God's energies. So God's essence is sort of God's core identity. And that is always unknowable, inaccessible, completely other. Whereas God's energies is God as an active, living force that's immanent and accessible. So God's energies flow from God's essence, but they're in some sense distinct. So I thought this was a good way of thinking about my experience. I think I experienced God's energies. This active living force somehow at the base of all things. So that makes more sense to me than Hindu mysticism, where that's all there is, this pure consciousness. There's no me, there's no you, there's no this, there's just this. I find that impossible to make sense of. But this idea that there's, in a way, a kind of, maybe God and the universe overlap, right? Yeah. So there's God's essence, which is wholly transcendent, wholly other. And then there's ordinary reality. We're sitting here right now. There's you, there's me, there's table over there.
Nathan. Table just over there instead of right here.
But maybe there's something in the middle, what the Eastern Church called God's energies, what the Hindu traditions call non-dual consciousness. Maybe there's this overlap bit that's sort of at the base of our world that sort of flows out of God. It's sounding real hippie shit now, isn't it? But
no,
it's going to the next level, though. You know what I mean? Like, it's gone from like this is feeling is slightly science based to like now let's throw this kind of fire into it.
I'm really interested in asking about how maybe you're now what you call heretical Christianity connects to that. So not necessarily how you came to Christianity, but you said you experienced, or you think you experienced, something like death at that moment. So is this how you, and you know, the natural Christian view, I guess, that's Orthodox or standard Christian view, I don't mean Orthodox as in the Eastern Orthodox Church, is that you, in quite a concrete sense, even maybe without your body, but you know, you with your characteristics and so on and so forth, get resurrected somehow in the afterlife or something like that. Do you see your death being more as something like this kind of abstract connection to God? Is this what Christians think of as heaven in your view? Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have a fully worked out answer, because often those can be more misleading.
I do have a fully worked out answer, but I don't know how to. Let me just give me a second.
Slightly ineffable.
So I guess, as I said, how it seemed was that I was annihilated, but this impersonal form of consciousness that is at the base of my being was somehow still there. Mm-hmm. Now, as you say, that's not the Christian way of thinking about things. But maybe we could bring in the way the Eastern Orthodox Church, that I'm very attracted to, thinks about the purpose of existence and life after death and so on. So for the Eastern Church, the purpose of existence is for God and the universe to become one. Right? It's very different to Western Protestant evangelical Christian. It's none of this stuff about Jesus being punished for our sins. That, you know, that was invented in the Protestant Reformation 500 years ago. Not the Eastern Church. It's all about God and the universe becoming one, but in a qualified sense, right? So we've talked about this distinction between God's essence and God's energies. So they think God's essence will always be other and separate. Will never be God in the sense of sharing God's essence, but they do think we will share in God's energies, right? Their view, the purpose of existence is that one day God's energies will permeate the whole universe. And they think of God's energies as sort of the divine life. So the hope is that all of creation will share in God's energies, right? And that's what they understand that the point of the Jesus stuff was, right? They think through Jesus, God shared in our form of life, so that we can one day share in God's form of life, God's energies. So now look, this is really now getting to the point where I think we would be in the realms of faith rather than belief. I would, this is all very. This is. I'm
just interested in how you understand it. Yeah.
But I suppose, insofar as I'm taking that hope of the purpose of existence seriously, and how I would connect that to my experience, I would say what I experienced was an encounter with this underlying form of consciousness that I achieved by annihilating myself. As I put it, tearing off the cotton wool.
I like that image.
Yeah,
I like that image.
So I brought about an experience of God by annihilating myself. The hope of the Eastern Church is that you can encounter God without annihilating yourself, right? By God and the universe becoming more intimately involved. So I suppose I definitely wouldn't want to say I believe that, because to me, belief implies very confident. But I think of faith as more hopeful commitment. You're committing to living in hope of something. So I suppose I've come to think of that Eastern Christian view of the purpose of existence as a credible possibility. So in the Why book, I argued there's good reason to think there is a purpose to existence, but who the fuck knows what it is? I guess I've come to think of the way the Eastern Church thinks about the purpose of existence as a credible hypothesis. And it's one I've sort of committed to living in hope of. And that gives me a community, gives me joy, peace, spiritual development, but very uncertain. It might not be true.
Well, that was kind of what I was going to ask about what we can really get from this for like day-to-day life. So as you guys may have gathered, and Ollie already knows, I'm a bit kind of like skeptical about, let's say, structured religion and the fact that, you know, everything written in the Bible is true. But I do think that there's something strange going on with, like, the Big Bang coming out of nothing, and then suddenly we're all these humans here who can chat and think and experience. It feels like that there needs to be some sort of explanation there that I don't quite know. You seem like you're a little closer to it for yourself personally. You know, you seem to be closer to what you believe in. I feel like I'm a little further away at this point in my life. With your kind of own personal subjective revelations, how do you feel it affects your daily life? Why do you live differently? How do you approach the day differently when you wake up in the morning?
I suppose, you know, one thing with this new book, Heresy, one thing I'm trying to do is sell religion a bit. not in the sense of, here's the one true faith, you have to believe it. More just the life benefits of religion, you know? Like, throughout all of human history, we've had these social structures that connect the spiritual life of the individual to a community, to the big moments of life, birth, marriage, coming of age, death, to the changing of the seasons. A sort of holistic way of connecting everything up. Now suddenly we're going through this social experiment where it's just like, oh, you can just be spiritual on your own. You know, go to yoga classes or something, have a walk in nature. I think I just want to say to the spiritual but not religious crowd, there are these life benefits from being part of a religious community. Now, I can understand people get hung up with the beliefs, you know, and you might think, well, I don't believe these particular things. And I've got very into the specifics of Eastern Orthodox Christianity. I would just sort of say, like, don't get too hung up with that, right? Yes, there are beliefs and there's a time for evaluating them. But you've also got to factor in the life benefits of connecting your spiritual life to a community. And there are ways of dealing with the beliefs that you can be very uncertain, you can be a bit heretical. You know, take it all as a big metaphor if you want. You know, there's a physics professor at my church who's a very spiritual person, and he connects his spiritual life to a community every Sunday at church. He doesn't believe someone rose from the dead. You know, he takes it as a beautiful metaphor. So actually, where I've found my spiritual home, I've been going on about the Eastern Orthodox Church. I'm not a member of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Although I like their philosophy and their way of thinking about God, I don't like that they don't have women priests. I don't agree with everything they think. I don't like that. I think, strictly speaking, they think gay sex is sinful, which I think is false and harmful. So I found my spiritual home combining the mysticism of the Eastern Church and the liberal flexibility of the Anglican Church. You know, I love, like the Anglican Church, there's the very conservative evangelical wing. The average Anglican Church, there's de facto flexibility. No one's going to, you know, interrogate you on what you believe. There's an openness to interpreting it in different ways. I guess, you know, because it was created because the king wanted a divorce and the Pope wouldn't let it. So it has the form of Catholicism, but with a greater liberal flexibility.
Bit more hippie.
Women priests. We've got a women Archbishop of Canterbury now.
Yeah. Maybe you're a rockstar Christian as well.
Yeah, it's not quite cool enough yet, is it, Christianity? But maybe it's getting there.
Yeah.
I mean, part of what I'm trying to do with this book is get open progressives to organised religion, which is incredibly unfashionable. Look, you've got this religion that's based around this kind of lefty radical Jesus. You know, it's like, what's the... Okay, it's been kind of captured by the right in the present moment. We need to fucking reclaim it, man.
Interesting.
And, you know, not to kick out the conservatives, you know, but to get that natural balance, you know. I think there's a natural balance in that society between, you know, progressives who are sort of trying to push us forward, but then conservatives thinking, hold on, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, whatever the expression is. But somehow in religion in the present moment, unlike in history where religion has reinvented itself and connected to the science and philosophy of the time, but religion at the moment is sort of completely captured by conservatives.
Yeah.
If it were more open to progressives and we could get that balance, I think that would bring a new life and vitality. And but yeah, at the moment these ideas are not too cool. So
well, I love how open you are to changing beliefs, to not being too certain in your beliefs, and it's really nice to hear about this kind of spiritual community of bringing you hope, joy, people to connect with. This conversation has really done that for me. So, Philip, thank you so much for coming on. That was a really, really enjoyable chat. I'm really, really interested, and maybe I'll be smoking a bit of toad venom.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm a bit more convinced.
Yeah,
to be fair, I might go try catch some toads down in the gardens here in Durham.
Well, thank you very much. Although, just to emphasize again, if people are, this is, in many ways, there are real psychological dangers.
Of course,
absolutely.
Which I think is often not emphasized enough in discussions of psychedelics. So be careful, kids.
Yeah.
Well, look, Philip, thanks so much. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. It's been really fun.
Cheers, man. I really, really enjoyed that. Seriously, that was so interesting.
That was fun.
Thanks.